So as Alex was saying, this exhibition, the concept for it, as they can attest to, I have been committed to for over 2 years. And it was delayed because these people are so busy, traveling the world, doing what they do best. And I have always been curious about creative couples and how they're drawn to each other, how they inspire one another, serving as each other's muse. And when I looked at the history of creative couples, such as Elizabeth Catlett, who was married to Charles White, and then went on to marry, oh my God, I'm drawing a blank, what was her story?
Francisco Pancho Moro.
Francisco Moro. And then there's Jackson Pollock and Lee Krasner, and there are just a host of others. And I've always wanted to explore what draws creative minds to one another, how they co-create with one another, and how they inspire one to create, not being totally engaged in the process, but how they're inspired by what they do. So we're going to begin by watching 2 videos, one of MK Asante, and, well, let me go back, I'm sorry. We're going to start with Maya's video first. And again, I hope that they would be here to speak on their own behalf, but they're not. So I'll try my best. Maya is a multimedia artist who's represented by our gallery. She uses photographs in her work. Many of them are her family members. And one in particular, which is not her family members, but the photograph that is in Brilliant Children was actually gifted to her husband, MK. I think it was an anniversary or a birthday. He had gone to an antique shop or thrift shop and found a large envelope full of old photographs of African American families. And so that, one of those photographs inspired Brilliant Children, which is included in this show. Spring, and I'll go through the images as we go through the PowerPoint presentation, but I just wanted you to know that in addition to her husband, who is a filmmaker and author and writer of poetry as well, so that is where they connect. That is one element that brings their works together and how they complement one another through their creative process. So we're going to begin by looking at a video of Maya. I'm sorry, this first is Maya Freeland Asante, of course, is on the left, and her husband, MK.
And I'm here at the U.S. Embassy in Madagascar installing my artwork Ubuntu, which is a sculpture inspired by the idea that I am because we are, meaning that one tiny scrap of tissue paper may seem insignificant, but when it's combined with many others, there's strength and power. Inspired by my grandmother, who was or is an amazing woman, and I believe is an artist in her own right, but didn't have the opportunities that I do. So for her to see in her lifetime me work at such a massive scale, it's really exciting for her. she really influenced a lot of this work. I found the tissue paper actually folded into her basement, and I used that as a vehicle to share the connectivity of quilt making and tissue paper along with the textile and fabric work here in Madagascar. Those are both 5x7.5?
Yeah.
It's been around the world. That's the amazing part. It's been from Ghana to Maine. This work has been in North Carolina, New York, San Francisco. It's on a constant journey, but now it's got a final resting place here in Madagascar.
Who's another artist that we represent in the gallery. So many of you may have attended the exhibition that was held here a couple of years ago, Our Common Bond, Mother, Daughter, Sister, Self, which again, I thank Leslie for writing the essay for that catalog. During the period that the exhibition was being held, I received a call from the State Department, and they commissioned Maya to come over and install that piece. In addition to that, I think they purchased 13 additional works from the gallery, many of which were included in that exhibition, and then others by other artists that we represent. So we thank the State Department for their ongoing support. This year they purchased a painting by Amy Sherrill and Jamia Richmond Edwards. And those works are have now been installed in the embassy in Dakar, Senegal. Yeah, so we're really, really proud of that. So you've seen Maya's process, and she's an extraordinary artist. She is the goddaughter of Maya Angelou, which hence her name, who she is named after. Her mother is Nina Freelon, a very famous jazz singer, and her father is Alan Freelon, the architect whose firm has built the Reginald Lewis Museum. They've done a lot of work recently at Morgan and are doing the new Smithsonian Museum of African American History and Culture. They've done museums all over the world and other buildings as well, of course, but I just thought that those would be familiar to you. And her great-grandfather is a famous painter as well, so there's a long legacy there of creativity, visual performance arts. Now on to her husband, MK.
My name is MK Asante, writer, filmmaker, professor, and author of Buck.
The fall in Philadelphia. Outside is the color of cornbread and blood. Change hangs in the air like the sneaks on the live wires behind my crib.
Buck is my memoir about the graceful survival against impossible circumstances. I was 13, and it was just me in the streets of Philly.
Young buck, buck wild, buck shots, buck town, black buck, make buck, slave buck, buck now. They stand where they always stand, between the liquor store and the corner store, next to the Fern Rock Apartments fence, under the train tracks, and across the street from Rocksteady. My mom calls them the corner boys because they're always out there, posted like guards at a checkpoint. They hug the block, huddled and hustle, eyeing everything and everyone, everywhere, every day.
But I survived. Not only survived, I thrived.
This goes out to all the young bucks all over the world. Hey yo, I'm hungry and foolish, and so I do this. They doubted me all my life, they never knew this. Young buck from the Illadale had it.
It's a blank page down in front of me, pen on top of it like a paperweight. The blank page is the starter pistol that fires and triggers my mind to sprint. I feel something I've never felt before. Purpose. A blank sheet of paper saved my life. Everybody in this world has a story. Buck is mine.
B-U-C-K. Buck.
So MK, who we hope at some point will conduct a book signing here, he's traveling all over the world promoting his book, which is being turned into a movie. We don't know, or I don't know at least, at what point that's going to be completed and released. But he has actually produced a film, which is The Black Candle, which has been featured on television, and it's about Kwanzaa and the history of Kwanzaa and the celebration of Kwanzaa, and culturally how we're connected as African Americans. So the way in which Maya, again, and MK collaborate, she's a visual, he's a literary artist, and he has written poetry to accompany some of her paintings at times, or her printmaking. So I'll go through some of her artwork. This piece is a collaboration between the two of them. It is available to purchase in this exhibition, and it's not hanging, but it is here. And it's a poster from his book, which Maya put, using her tissue ink technique, applied that, and now it's a poster monoprint. Brilliant Children, that's the photograph that I was speaking of. It's African American children in a classroom. Handmade, Maya was talking about the inspiration that her grandmother has given her, and the hands in the top part of this photograph, of this print, are her grandmother's hands, and her grandmother has since passed away. Look Down on War, this is her great-grandfather, Alan Freelong, a photograph of him. He was opposed to the war, he served in World War I, and Maya has said that he had a nervous breakdown as a result of that. Carol and Michael Platt. See Carol Bean and Michael Platt. Well, because we're running behind, I was going to do a long intro, so I'll just pick on you all and let you talk about yourselves. Come on back up front. So Carol, tell us where you were educated and about your poetry.
And it was Michael who kind of took me by the arm one day and said, look, we're going to do that book for your father, my dad having passed a few years before, the book, your academic book that you never did. And it's going to be your poems, because Michael was one of the people who did know that I wrote, and to whom I had showed my poetry. And he said, it's going to be your words and my images. And that was what we did. That was our first collaboration. Usually I write, it was my way, has been my way of journaling, personally, and as I said, I didn't show it to very many people. Even when I did, there were people who had known me a long time, and they said, well, I never knew that you wrote. I never knew that you wrote. And it was a very it has been, as a process, a very wonderful and liberating experience to share moments of your life that are fairly intimate and circumstances that those around you may have known. For example, my finding my son, then the death of my son, a whole series of things, my mother growing old with us and then dying, and then with Michael and other friends even before Michael, traveling and the things that you see, the people whom you meet and experience. So usually I have my writing that I may pull out and show to Michael at some point, and then Michael's artwork, any of those of you who've been to our house know that it's all over the house, and including the bathroom, the kitchen, and life kind of takes place in our kitchen where that photograph is. So that has been our process. I have lived with the visuals a lot longer than Michael has heard my words. And again, even to the point of my reading and sharing my poetry in that way with friends and people who don't even know you, has been something that I have come to fairly recently. Michael, on the other hand, is a very established artist, and he works his magic in, I think, very special ways, combining, as he's done in these images here, images that begin in the studio. This piece right here is one the model usually comes to the house in the kitchen, gets painted with theatrical makeup while watching television, which is sort of a presence in our house. And then everything moves to the back studio, which is the photography studio. And against the back, a white, or sometimes a black, but most recently white backdrop, the model gets photographed doing assorted things. And then it goes into the computer where Michael begins to work on it in Photoshop. And the many, many, many layers that are possible and all the possibilities that are possible in Photoshop is what eventually creates the image. You'll see the botanicals there in the background. That's from my trip to Australia. In particular, we went to almost the center of Australia, to Uluru, known as Ayers Rock. That was the name that the Europeans gave it. They always seem to have to name things that people who've been living there for a long time have had, and known, and have their own words for and names for. So that has been a combination of combining the visuals, sort of a process of photo montage, if you will, or collaging, and then putting certain details together. The vegetation in Australia was something that really drew our attention particularly. And in both of these images, you see that Michael's working with the model, giving the appearance of being more than one person. So you have a crowd, a sense of crowds. Let me read the poem here, Gathering of Women. Gathering of women. Women's stories at the waterhole, those that can be told. Clouds linger, tangled with morning light and remnants of moon. Dawn illuminating Uluru, transubstantiation of light to mass. In the damp red sand, find the seconds of the day, imprints of the tracks of insects and birds, of slitherings and small burrowing animals. All that remains of their night of feeding, insinuation of presence. We saw only rocks, crevices, and the stark shadows of cave entrances. They, the beginnings and endings of stories, and signifying marks and spaces. However did the stolen children hold fast to their dreaming? How did they recall and claim their dream time denied? And following it with the poem that accompanies this one, this was the first image that Michael did of the Australia series. We have a portfolio of these images that we're calling First Fruits. Dreaming memories where twilight spills into darkness and dawns at Uluru in all the places of which I shall tell you now. Where yesterdays and tomorrows are half-moons clinging to clouds and midnight lights consuming shadows. There, where you shall listen to my stories. Those places where forever ripens into dawn, conjuring memories of morning light on hard red rock. That is forever how things came to be. We have been our yesterdays and our tomorrows on red sand, cold and familiar to bare feet. We have been red dawns, soft and deep as dreaming. And you will listen to our stories of how things came to be and are. Thank you. I'm going to pass the mic to Michael now.
This visual art thing is something I wanted to do seriously ever since the second grade. I've had it all, I just never stopped. Traditionally, you draw, you paint, and you make prints, you do sculpture. But that process is very labor intensive, because it's hard to make a blank sheet of paper into magic, and the whole process that you have to go through to do it. Photography was something that I used just to record my paintings. There was no really need for photography at all. But I hung around with a lot of photographers. Then this digital thing came out. I started with digital printmaking. I found out you can take an image from a Xerox image, and you can transfer that image to a plate or a stone. So that means I can do a photo litho or etching. And I started out that way, and eventually I just became a lot more intrigued with the whole digital process by itself, just let it just be. But then that made me check out photography again. And I found out what I was doing in the long run. I was just collecting images, like for a collage I was going to put together. And in the computer, you can do that, not necessarily quick and fast, but you can make changes quick and fast. If you ever did a drawing, you made the wrong stroke, it's hard to change that sucker. You might as well just throw it away. One of my favorite painters, I call him the last of the museum guards, Francis Bacon, he said, most of his best pieces are in the trash, but he just went too far. But when you're dealing with the computer, you can stop if you record your steps. I was talking to another photographer, Charles Sessions, and he was an analog photographer regular, but he made the switch to digital. And I asked him, why'd you do it? He said, just got lazy. He got tired of waiting on the right time of day to take the picture. So he started to take these pieces and put them together in Photoshop. It's a nice way of working, but you still have to make the magic. And you might start out with an idea, but don't be too surprised if you end up with something else. And most of the pieces I work on I usually start from the piece I just finished, and usually end up with a series of pieces. But you can never predict how it's going to look. Because if it worked one time, you think you can just try it again, it doesn't work. Then you have to add a new element. The new element I'm working with right now is these, like this young lady making sun shadows. And we're in the studio, and I have the skylight. At a certain time of day, the skylight is on the floor. So she was there, she said, what are we doing today? Come on, you got me all this paint on me, I'm naked and stuff. What are we gonna do? I said, okay, we're gonna make sun shadows. And that's what we did. I started doing a lot of them. And then when I put when we're making the shadows in a circle, which goes back to this Aboriginal thing about dream time and the water hole. I mean, everything just seemed to just come together. As most of you can tell, I usually work with women. I don't know why. They look good. But the pressure is on to do some men. And I realize that. At my age, I like these young guys. I'm having fun. I'm having a lot of fun. And if it ain't fun, it's not worth doing. like I said, making the magic comes from when you put the right two things together, and you know when it's there. And the deal is not to tickle it to death, like we have a tendency when we paint, and when you draw, you just tickle something to death. You tickle all of the whole life out of the piece. I was talking to one fellow one time, and he said, you gotta have enough nerve to stop when you feel it's right. Even though it's not looking like what you want it to be, you stop and move on to the next piece. And that's how you get your production up. You can always make anything better, but stop. You know, it's almost like cooking. When you get something, you're cooking something, taste just, what if I add just a little bit, you add a little bit of too much of everything. It don't taste like anything, because you didn't have the nerve to stop. You know, you just stop and move on. You know. Most of my work are influenced by a little bit of history, a little bit of storytelling. The stories might not be really true. I just made them up. And why not? I can make up stories. I can make up rituals. Other people can't. Don't tell me I can't make them up. You know, so I invent them. A lot of times the stories come from after the piece is finished. Once the piece is finished, I might know what the piece is about. Sometimes it takes my wife to come back and tell me what the piece is about. You know, I don't know. I'm much more interested in the image, making the image and grabbing your brain. One of my biggest pleasures when I go to a show, especially a show of my work, is to have people really looking at the work. You know, that really makes me feel good. That means I got you. I gave a talk in Morocco, and at the end of the talk, the young lady was crying. Got you. You know, I got it. You know, to move people is very important to make you feel. If I don't feel anything, I know you ain't. But like I said, most of these pieces come together about 4 o'clock in the morning, and I drink champagne.
So we also have videos of everyone. Some you know about, meaning the artists, and most you don't. So we captured some footage at the opening reception.
You never know what you miss. Come to those opening receptions too.
Alex, let's put that video together. But there's more. So, I will always be rooting for you, and the model for this piece is sitting right here. And the title of the poem that accompanies that is Dreaming Memories by Carol. Desert Trance, which is here. The poem is Gathering of Women. The Laying on of Stone, the poem by the same title, by Carol, of course. The Spirit Demons is the title of the poem. All right, on to Leslie, Keith Hammond, and Jose. All right, so they're battling who's going to speak first, so I'll hand the mic over to you. To speak first. So Leslie, could you give us a little bit of your background, please?
Oh, okay. Excuse me, I have to find my way to the circle.
Yes.
Or the triangle. Am I correct? Okay, very good, thank you. I was born and raised in New York City, born in South Bronx, South Queens. From an Afro-Caribbean family that came from Barbados. They migrated all of them, so I'm like the first generation born and raised in this country. My parents were born in the islands and then sent back later on and raised and then came back again. But I'm the first one I had total experience here. As far as I could ever remember, I was always interested in the process of making things, and I never really in the beginning saw it as art because my grandmother was a seamstress in the Garment District. My father was a shipfitter in the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and he would build submarines and aircraft carriers, and he was a master carpenter. And he would then, is this better? He would then come home, and anything that needed repairing in the house or building in the house, he would do it. I have 3 siblings, a brother like next to me, and then 2 younger sisters. And as my father was building, my brother had absolutely no interest in it. So when my father was laying sheetrock, I would be right there because I just loved the idea of putting materials together to make something. I also was fascinated with how my grandmother could take a piece of cloth or scraps without a pattern and just cut and put them together. So it was the abstraction of that process, and that's where I began my whole career. I became a Girl Scout later on in the Girl Scout troop. I was the arts and one who would make stuff for the whole troop. My life is a journey. I spent a lot of time, training students and telling them have a master plan and all of this. And when they asked me, I just, if it looks strange or different, I'm going to go down that road. Because to me, that is where the essence of life and the juice of the experience that you're trying to capture can be found. It's in the experience of discovery. So I always find myself on a journey. The fact that I'm in this show, I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around. And even though Myrtis asked us to do this, and I knew that it was the right thing to do, but it wasn't something that I was really enraptured with doing, because when I do my art, it's like a very personal, intimate, daily ritual thing to me, and it's how I cleanse myself and I refocus myself. I spent my career academically, and I have a PhD from Johns Hopkins University. I have a BFA in Fine Arts from Queens College in New York. So when I decided to switch over to academia, it was because I got a scholarship. But it was also because I realized that in the whole experience of being a person from the African diaspora, I could never find anybody in the arts when I was growing up. There were few and far between. Not only that, I was never affirmed in my life that this was a proper vocation for me. As I continued to stay in the arts, and my family would question me, and they would say, "Why are you doing that? She's a little strange." It's still a little strange. I continue to be strange. I sort of revel in my strangeness. But the one thing that I did recognize is that that's what made me happy. That's what made me whole. That's what gave me focus. And that's where I was when I was out of order. I always had to go back to making my art to get myself focused and disciplined and centered, always centered. And the only thing that ever centered me was when I was doing my art, all right? It's like a mantra, you go back into the center of yourself. So it never occurred to me that I was, I knew there was art and I was helping all these artists get at shows all over the place, and I'm writing their catalogs and whatever. And I go home and make my art. And then one day, a very good friend of mine, Deborah Willis, decided to out me. And that is, drag me out of the closet, and she did a show in about, I guess it was 96, 97, sometime around there, called Artist Scholar. And she decided to look at scholars who had sort of given up their aesthetic lives in order to advance the cause of writing and curating. So I was in a show with David Driscoll. I was in a show with Arturo Lindsay. I was in a show, the same show, Floyd Coleman, and Israel Adewale. All of these individuals had spent a lot of time teaching and writing about art, but I was the only woman in the show, and it was really quite revelatory and very terrifying. It was at the Smithsonian, and it was a moment. It was a moment where I inadvertently found myself at a crossroads, a crisis where I couldn't write anymore, and I had reached what is that proverbial writer's block, and I realized that I had reached this impasse because in order to continue writing, I had to stop and go back to my art to work out certain issues. There was a void. So I was explaining this process to Deborah Willis because I talked, in those days we talked, God, I knew we should have had stock in AT&T. My telephone bills literally were no less every month than $300 to $500 because my colleagues and I, Deborah Willis and Laurie Sims and Tritobia Benjamin, we would consult from like midnight to 2 o'clock in the morning. And we would just work through stuff. And this one night I was kind of like having a meltdown with Deborah. And she said, that's it. And I said, what? She says, you're in the show. I said, what show? She said, I'm doing an Artist Scholar show and you are in the show. So at that moment, I said, okay. I allowed for her to come to the house to look at the work, and she came in the front door, and I said, well, let's go upstairs to my studio where it is. And she said, no. She said, what's that? And I said, oh, and I have a 3-story townhouse like this, and there are fireplaces, and I had turned one of the mantles into an altar. I said, that's my altar. I said, come on, let's go upstairs. She said, nope. She told her sister, write that down. So she said, no, we're going to do the first floor first. She went through every floor. She said, okay, take that, take that, take that. And everything that I had done had been something that had been built or constructed or had been pulled together to kind of like give resolution to a piece of my life, all right? And as we got to the 3rd floor, the checklist was filled, and she said, okay. She said, we'll send the truck, we'll come and get everything. So my son is in school in New York, and he knows that I'm having this show at the Smithsonian, and he's like, oh, what? What is this about? I said, well, they're gonna have an exhibition, I'm gonna be in it, my artwork. He said, what artwork? He says, I'm coming down. He says, I'll drive you over to the Smithsonian. I said, thank you, because I was too nervous to drive. It was raining that night. So we get over to the Smithsonian. They had given me a huge gallery, my own space within the Arts and Industries building. And I had filled this space, and it was just like, it was overwhelming. I was choking. I was literally almost claustrophobic because my whole life was all in on top of me. And my son walks into this gallery, and he looks around. He says, I'm coming to see what this is that you do, that's your art. And he looks around, and he says, damn, Mom, did you bring the whole house? I said, how would you know? You grew up in this. I said, you were in the middle of helping me construct this. I have pictures of you sitting on my lap while I'm weaving and this stuff. So you don't know any difference. And he walks up to the altar, similar to something like this, only it was a much more complex altar, to my grandmother. He goes up to the altar and he points and he goes, I was looking for the hot sauce. How come it's here in the middle? This morning I was making, he said, there's my sauce. Because we made stuff. We didn't have money, so we made everything, all right? the idea of doing this piece with my partner, it has many hilarious stories for which we don't have a lot of time. However, I will say this, that this is the first real kind of installation. He and I have done several other collaborative pieces together. Again, his life is similarly a journey, and our coming together was a process of 2 years of resistance, because we were introduced by friends who thought that I was a little strange and artsy, and that he was a little strange and artsy, and that maybe if these two strange artsy people talked together, they might help the social grouping, because we were sort of difficult to mingle with, because the conversation would get a little artsy, too artsy for them. So they said, put the two weird people together. But for 2 years, he didn't want to talk to me, and I didn't want to talk to him. And then when we started to talk, it was like, okay, maybe we have a basis of a conversation. And the greatest irony was that at the moment where we started to kind of create a real baseline of communication, it was 9/11. It was 9/11, and I met Micah, and I had agreed, because it was just after I had come out of the closet to be an artist. I had said to them, okay, I'll be in the faculty show, and I was going to put a piece of artwork with. When 9/11 happened, I told them no, I was not going to do it. I'm too upset, too hysteria. And one of my students is walking by the door, and he hears me telling the gallery director that I'm not being in the show. And this student begins to cuss me out. This is the moment when I meet him, because I had then had to recommit to doing this piece. And I meet him, and now I give the mic to you.
So I'll pick up where.
Yes.
Anything you want to do.
Okay.
So, but don't forget to give us your background.
I will. I'll work that into this.
Okay.
He's a great storyteller.
I'm going to continue for a minute with what Leslie was talking about. 9/11, which we all remember. All you saw was the plane going into the building on television, one after the other. When Leslie and I met, oh, by the way, I'm an architect and a city planner. I started out in art and then decided to pursue architecture. And when Carol met me, I taught at Howard University for 27 years, architectural school. When she met me, she didn't know what I did. Most folks knew me as an architect, never as an artist. One of the reasons they never knew was because, like Leslie, I painted and created sculptures in the evenings. I only created enough to fill my environment, and then I'd stop. And sometimes I would stop painting for, like right now, I've stopped painting for 8 years, and now I'm going back at it. When Leslie and I met, and she asked me about African architecture, and I had a book on African architecture. So the Wednesday night after 9/11, I decided to drive over here to bring the book to Leslie. Leslie tells me she's going to do an installation on Friday and wants to show me the drawings. Now, here's a difference between architectural education and art education. Architectural education, I would make my students tell me as much as they could about their design process before they picked up a pencil. That's different than art. Artists sometimes, as Michael said, will come up with the name of the piece after they have completed it. Architects work totally differently. We are charged with designing a facility, let's call it a building, in collaboration with the owner, and in many instances, engineers and contractors. So my midlife was more of collaboration than it was me being an artist and executing and doing everything. Architects will come up with the concept, then the engineers come in, and if the client doesn't have enough money, then obviously you've got to scale it down. So my architectural education prepared me to come into art, or come back into art, in a kind of different way. More philosophical initially than working. So when Leslie and I work together, it is more of a conversation in the beginning before we execute anything. And when I say anything, I mean anything, including food. Probably the thing that we collaborate on the most is food. I might start something like a couple of years ago, we were doing fundraising for Creative Alliance. Initially, I was doing salmon. Now, that's fine when you have 10 to 15 people. However, when it got up to 50 people, I'm not buying salmon and cooking salmon for 50 people. So Leslie and I started saying, what else can we cook? And the idea of chicken wings came up. So I created smoked chicken wings. Leslie tasted the smoked chicken wings. And you know what the next thing happened? She then develops a sauce to go on top of the chicken wings. In 2 weeks, we will prepare chicken wings and her potato salad for a Thanksgiving dinner that we've had with friends for at least 8 years now. These folks hide food. We walk into the house with the chicken wings and the potato salad, and the first thing that happens is that they start pulling out their take-home containers to fill those up before they sit down to eat. Okay? Now, in terms of what Leslie and I collaborate on the most now is jewelry. The lady got me hooked.
It's not my fault.
It was her fault. We went to Venice, and the first trip to Venice, I happened to see Venetian ladies walking around with Venetian pearls on, white t-shirts, sandals, and jeans, and they looked elegant. The next year, Leslie and I went back. I bought some Venetian pearls to make a necklace for Leslie, my deceased mother, and my daughter-in-law. I've never made those necklaces yet. Less than 3 months later, she takes me down to the convention center because they're having a bead and gem show. Now, there aren't a whole lot of African American men who are straight that do jewelry. When I go in there now, you know, it's like watching people watch me. You know, what's he doing? Why is he picking that up? Well, how much of that is he going to use? Can I have some of that? What are you going to do with all that? Do you have a shop? I get all these kinds of questions. Not, that's a nice thing that you're doing. It's glad to see that you're in here. You know, all of that. I get none of that. I mean, it's like, why are you in here making jewelry? I'm doing jewelry, ladies and gentlemen, because paintings aren't selling as well as my jewelry. Okay? You know, to be very, very honest with you, ladies, when are we having the show?
Next weekend.
Next weekend.
It's a plug.
Any of you ladies who, I saw one lady down there, I already see a couple of people. Well, there's one collector of ours at the end of the table already. There's another one up here, and there's a person that's sitting here beside me who's constantly wearing the jewelry.
The circle.
Which circle?
The one that's 2 steps back.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. So, you know, those of you who like jewelry, please come back next week.
Yeah.
That is our significant collaboration other than the food. Hope you like the installation. The top part came to us as we were driving back from Charleston, South Carolina, and stopped in Cracker Barrel.
Thank you. We're just going to look at a video of these two installing this piece, a couple of images, and then we're going to open up the floor for questions.
I understand, but now you're on one side. See what happens here?
Okay, well, we
See,
moved down. Move down.
Yeah, you have to move it way over. Because you see, you put this one is like 6-8 inches beyond.
Working with you, the whole.
I understand. These long ones are gonna show up.
Grandmother's vanity, and there are a lot of things for my grandmother, and my grandmother's from Barbados. And these are all of the kind of what I call the pharmacopoeia that women use to mix and match and butter themselves up, and okay. And even though it says Vaseline, it's really shea butter, made in Ghana.
Yeah.
If my instincts say yes, 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 or his instincts say yes, 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 we get it. You get it. Okay? We have a common understanding about certain beads, and usually I'm the quality one. I'll go in and I'll say, no, women are not going to wear this. Get this.
We don't always agree.
But the outcome is always great.
One thing though, we have learned that if he really, really likes it, we go, okay, let's get it. I really, really like it, he gets it. And then when we're working, he'll go, where's that ugly bead you made?
So let's start talking about the Adorn Freeform one.
Oh,
That's you.
okay. Leslie, as we were preparing the pieces for the installation, one night said, you know, it'd be nice if we had a hat form. Okay. That means, Jose, it's time for you to create something. Okay? Now, the material that you see, how many of you can guess what that material is? Anybody?
Is it copper?
Huh?
Copper?
No.
It's a fiber.
It's a fiber. Okay, I will tell you, because all of you is looking very puzzled about it. It's called ribbon mesh garland. It's primarily used for Christmas decorations. And we saw the initial piece, roll of it, at, you heard me mention Cracker Barrel. We bought a couple of rolls of it, and then it was a question of trying to utilize it as a sculptural element that had no weight to it. So that became the same material that we're utilizing here. I've had those heads for a long time, probably about 15 to 20 years. And when Leslie said create a piece, a hat piece, obviously I needed an armature, so I grabbed one of the heads and then began to create the first adorned form. Came over to install the piece. Someone looked at it and said, "Gee, this would be nice in the window if we had two." That meant the next day, bright and early, I'm up working on the second piece. Okay. Now, I will tell you, since creating these two, there are two others that have been created since. One that is a wearable hat, and the other one, which I will probably finish tomorrow, which will be a wearable hat. So, the one thing I can say about my partner, she's forever challenging me. Okay, why don't you try this? Why don't you try that? Why don't you try that? You don't think I'm telling you the truth? The woman came in, 13 years ago. She was selected as a guest curator for the carpet. And came in and said, "Would you like to be in the show?" I said, yeah, I think I'd like to be in this show. Okay, the next weekend, she comes in with a roll of canvas. I guess you better get started. Needless to say, ladies and gentlemen, the painting that I created, now, being an architect, going back into art, I said, okay, I'll photograph the painting when I get it back. The painting never came back. Much to my delight, surprise, and it annoyed some of my friends, the painting sold. So this is my partner.
But the best thing was that your parents actually
come
to the courtroom to see your work.
Yeah.
So Leslie, I wanted you to talk about some of the elements that you've incorporated into Adorned Freeform too.
Okay, now, it's interesting that the way this was constructed, because basically, he's the architect builder. And in this particular instance, it sort of flipped, because what happened was he started making different forms. The top piece of the installation are maybe about 6 or 7 different forms, free forms that he was experimenting with. And all he was doing when he got the material was making these forms. And I came in, and his house had just been transformed to a total studio, and I said, okay, now what am I supposed to do? He said, I don't know, I'm just making this stuff, you're supposed to figure it out. So I said, okay. And I looked at it and I went, wow, I said, this is really strange, because I was getting, one of my passions where he lives in Prince George County is that there are a lot of churches and there are a lot of new African immigrants who come in. The thing is that as they have assumed either a Catholic persuasion or an Episcopalian or AME persuasion, they still dress very traditionally. So on Sundays, I like to go out under the guise of doing domestic shopping, and I ride by the churches to see the women in their galeries. And so I looked at this and I said, wow, these look like some of the head wraps that I see. So as we were talking about what we would do for this installation, it came down to a question of where his passion and his respect for women rest. And it's very similar to, do I have to go to the circle?
Go to the piece.
Go to the piece?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Speak up. Tell me what you want to, Don't worry.
So the top of the installation is about I can do this because, I can manipulate it. But this is a conglomeration of about 6, 7, 8 different individual forms that he made. And as we were talking about him making jewelry, I said, one of the things that has become very clear in his relationship with jewelry is that people ask us, why don't you go online and have a website? And he has developed a relationship with his clients, and he likes to keep it very customized, so it's one-on-one. He likes to tweak it. And then he gets mirrors. We have mirrors when we sell the gems. And he likes people to look at themselves and to feel comfortable and have the pieces of jewelry talk to themselves or each other. So I said, well, look, I like to collect old, I have weird things. I like to collect old mirrors. So I had this old mirror that I had collected. I said, let's get this mirror sort of like a face. And the people, when they come, they can look at it. And I said, and then why don't you make kind of like an excessive jewelry? That is, make these long, long necklaces. So he started making black ones. I said, too dark, no. Then he started making multicolored ones. I said, And then he said, well, I said, why don't we just stay, because he had these forms already made, let's stay white. Let's stay in that rut. So as he started to make these are like 6, 8 feet long. And when they're not this anymore, they'll probably sell them. They can be belts. I wear them. They're triples or doubles or quadruples. They're gorgeous. But I also collect fabrics because my grandmother was a seamstress, and I love textiles. I used to weave fabric. So this is a shoki cloth. This is Nigerian wedding cloth. This is what brides wear. And so I said, well, let's take it on shoki and work with the shoki. Since we have these forms, we have the mirror, affectation of necklaces. And then I will do kind of like what is a quote-unquote vanity. Your grandmother, women's homes, women's boudoirs, bathrooms. There's always a space where we have our stuff. And I say stuff with great personal intensity. And it's all of the things that we use to mix to make ourselves beautiful before we go out to present ourselves to the world, or before we walk out of our bedroom to just deal with the routines of life. But there's all of this kind of stuff, and there's always like a little tray there. Usually my grandmother always had a mirror tray, so he found these mirror trays, and as we were having this conversation, he would go out looking for these things. I go into the junk stores. He's not real crazy about that. He's an architect, high design. So he would go out and find things. And then the objects that you see around here are things that come from my grandmother's dresser, her boudoir, her vanity. And these are sachets, and if you pick it up and just crunch it like this, it still smells with the lavenders and the sachets, you understand? And when I was talking about the shea butter, that's shea butter that is made in Ghana when you pick it up by the Vaseline Corporation. So when I found it, I went, oh, this is so cool, So I used it for a while, and I said, no, this goes part of my installation because I could never find it. There's black soap there, that's the soap in Africa, traditional soap that they would use. They're cowrie shells. And then the other thing I collect are laces, because I'm very interested in the anonymity of women's work, the fact that so many women had a way to express themselves, but their names are never on anything because their work is so perishable and dismissible that we go to the thrift shop and we find these beautiful things that were made by somebody's mother, some woman in the family, to decorate the home, to make the home a space of sacredness on the table, on the sofa, on the mantle, or whatever. So I collect them, oftentimes, and I will use them whether they're in good shape or not. So this one is slightly damaged, which means it was used, it had a past life. So it brings energy to the piece. On the bottom of the skirt is, again, another piece of a shoki cloth, Then, as I'm working on it, I had asked Myrtis if she had a small stool that I could sit on, just because my back was old and hurt and broke down, and I wanted to sit and really work on this. And she brought me a stool, and I sat on this stool during the duration. And then as I was sitting on this stool, I said, wait a minute,
Myrtis, do you have any? Well, Myrtis just happens to collect stools. So she brought down about 3 or 4 stools. She said, which size do you want? I said, that one is perfect. Now, on the stool, I placed basically what in the Caribbean we would call is a trivet, made out of cowrie shells, okay? It's an 8-point star, 8-point star. It's a sign of harmony of the universe. But then, to end off this, you asked me a question when you first said, she said, well, is this to any saint or Orisha or deity or whatever? And I said, oh, no. Well, the other day there's a lecture going on at school and there's a young man talking and all of a sudden he says something and I went, oh my God, thank God for smartphones, I pick it up. And I go to my cell phone and I log in, but it'll read the name of the Orisha, Obatala. And I almost freaked out when I started reading. I was trying to, and I gave you a written statement, which was very generic and whatever, and it was really talked about how Jose and I put it together. But what happened was, is when this other artist was talking, it reminded me about something that Michael referred to, which was the magic. And the magic is really the shamanism, the spirit, okay? And the intuitive process that goes on between collaborators or people in artistic communities. And this was a very intuitive process between Jose and I where we were trying to link and meld. Obatala in Yoruba religion is the deity, the Orisha, who is responsible for the head, and all things human. Obatala is said to be the one to craft the human body in clay before God breathes life into it. Obatala, for the uninitiated, becomes the Orisha of protection because Obatala cares about all things human. So as I'm reading this, I'm going, this is so Jose, okay? He is a kind of person who's very, very focused. Obatala is about truth. It's about truth. Obatala's number is 8, the stars, the points. Obatala's color is white. Obatala's favorite minerals or crystals are halite, crystal, quartz, rock crystal. I am freaking out.
Oh, wow. I just knew that intuitively.
You know, and usually when I go to that, oh my God, I go, oh, Jesus, Mary, Joseph, Obatala, all the time. I go, you've been calling the Orisha's name all that time. And channeling. That's the magic. That's the show.
Beautiful.
Okay? So
Yes.
that's where the peace comes from.
I
It's just like that.
I want to go back to Michael and Carol's work, and I'm also going to open the floor now for questions. And one of the questions I have for you, the two of you, is does your imagery inspire her poetry, or does your poetry inspire your imagery?
Do I have to get this up? Well, the longer you do it, this collaboration, sometimes you might start out with a real pure idea of, I'm not going to illustrate her portrait. She's not going to illustrate my images. But sometimes over a period of time, you cheat. You have to. It's like making sausage. You want to be in the kitchen. So it goes back and forth sometimes. But most of the time, we like to start out with that idea of not illustrating each other's work. But sometimes we just change this word. It'll go with this piece. You know? Like, everybody looking. That's what we do.
Yeah, there was an exhibit that Michael was in a couple of years ago, and he had all of the pieces linearly around the studio. And I walked in there, and wrote sort of a collage of sort of poetic fragments and went with it in that order. And then, of course, when it got to the gallery, it was down at the Organization of American States Gallery, he ended up putting it up in a completely different way. So everything that I had written that had a certain sequence and a certain logic didn't hold anymore, you know. So then I had to go back and say, okay, I have to make some sense out of this, so there's a little more correspondence, because otherwise it wouldn't work as well.
Yes.
Within that challenge.
I want to pick on your model for a moment and ask her what was the experience like in working with Michael. And say your name, please.
Hi, I'm Asia. I don't know I was going to speak, but the experience was cold.
Have a stand up.
Yeah, I was freezing, but his home is very warm and welcoming. So I got comfortable, and it was kind of like a community event, because his wife and Michael, they all like helped paint on my body, and then she was cooking, and it was just like a nice like family inviting like atmosphere. And it lasted for a long time, and he just allowed me to do pretty much whatever I wanted to do, and he would just kind of direct certain poses and just let me kind of just work naturally, like painted in all white, or we did one series where I was painted in all black. So it was just whatever was just felt at the moment. We kind of just let things work organically.
So Michael, has anyone ever turned you down when you approached them to model for one of your pieces?
Yeah. Like being in the club. Most of the time you get turned down. You know, but sometimes it's just surprising when certain people say yes. Because most of the time it's the people, if you're around Hollywood working at college age, you know, the women who model for you, first of all, are very attractive. You know, and they are very attractive women. And I had one experience where this gal, she must have been about 300 pounds. And she was looking at my work on the computer, and she kept going, I like this. I like this. I knew she was leaving town tomorrow, so I hit on her. Say, well, what you want to do? Hook you on up. We're going back to the studio. She kept saying, I like this. She said, let's do it right now. I said, okay. But I try to have another series going, I call it Mature Women Series. But, you know, you get fewer takers. But once I put the women in the nightgown, I got more takers. So, it's fun. It's fishing, you know. If I get a little wine in me, I'm asking you.
So Carol, how have you felt about Michael photographing all these women in the nude?
I guess it hasn't really been an issue. You know, my mother lived with us the last 6 years of her life, and when she first came, and as Michael was beginning this process, I thought, my mother's of that generation where you're going to think twice about it. And I don't know whether the fact that he had a bit of dementia contributed, but she was definitely, it was after my father had gone in a different place. So the very first time Mom came to the house, I tried to delay going to bed as long as possible. And, but the model and the painting had to get started. So I left Michael and the model downstairs, and I would come down every once in a while to peek, because my mother also turned out to be more of a night bird than I had realized. And when she finally did get ready to go to bed, you had to go through where the painting was going on, and I was peeking at that point. And so my mother came in, our house was kitchen, bathroom, and then you go up to the front stairs. And so she looked, and then she went up closer, and she sort of inspected, and then she nodded, and she said, very nice, and then she went on up to bed. So I thought, okay, you know, that's it. So it hasn't really been a problem. I think there's a certain level of sort of trust and comfort that's, I think, exists. You know, I'm very pleased that it is that way in our home, that people feel comfortable enough to do that. And I think sort of model-artist relationship that's definitely something that goes on. And there's, I think, a lot of unspoken things that could happen and that people could say, but for the most part, that's not the case. And I think those people who have actually been there and experienced it, I think the fact that, like I said, it's a bit of a collaborative effort always. Because you never, our household, when you never quite know who's going to be coming through. And the bottom rule is if the model's comfortable, then it's all right. If the model's not comfortable, then you can't come in now, you gotta come back later. So that is pretty much the tone of things. So it's been fun and interesting. And everybody usually does chip in at some point. Whether you're kibitzing, you know, I'll put a little more paint on that area. Oh, that one's fine. How about some colors? What color are you going to paint the necklace? And so on and so forth.
But I would have to admit, I don't think I could do this if I was 35.
And why so?
Put the film back in.
We don't have no film.
Thinking about something else.
Just thought I was trying to draw it out of you. Carol, have you ever modeled for Michael?
I have. Michael did this is when I first came down to Washington. He did a nude painting of me when I was, I think when I turned 50. My son was coming down to visit, so he, you know, had to put his 2 cents worth in, made a few suggestions. And he said, and then when I turned 60, also, I did another painting piece, and that one we went up to use this giant Polaroid camera that looks like one of the clown sets in the circus. And the model who was going to do it kind of called up and said, we're running really late. And Michael looked at his watch and said, we're already on the clock, so somebody's got to take the clothes off and paint it. That, you know, I was the one who was present. Another one of his students had been there, another Howard student who was at School of Visual Arts in New York. And she said, Platt, I always wanted to model for you, but I just didn't seem to get around to it when I was down there. So I'm ready now. So the 2 of us. So I have that. And it's a very curious sensation. You know, everyone's been naked in the shower and been soaped up. Well, it's kind of that effect. You feel as though you have a covering on you. And if you've been to Mardi Gras in New Orleans and you've seen painted naked people who are just very comfortable, whether it's because of the alcohol they've consumed or just kind of deep, you know, I think is almost irrelevant because the sensation that the paint gives you, and the longer you're in it, the more, you know, you feel that way. When we did the shoot in New York, we had to walk because the studio had no shower facilities. They had a very small bathroom, so there was no question of getting unpainted or washing anything off. So we were walking through the streets with this paint, this theatrical makeup that had been applied fairly heavily, kind of cracking. We were looking like Dorian Gray, going over to, you know, one of the dormitories where Ogechi was staying so we could use the shower in Ogechi's small place. And New Yorkers being New Yorkers just kind of, yeah, there goes another one of those painted people. It wasn't a big deal.
Any questions? None? For anyone, excuse me.
What's your name today?
Leslie.
Leslie, yes. I just want to thank you for sharing your story because prior to today, I've never had an appreciation for installation art. This is very emotional for me. I just come back from undressing my mother's vanity. And she's 91 and has moved to Arizona, and she did as much as she could in her home in Ohio and then left. And I came home and took my father, who died December 26th, clothes and dumped them in the Goodwill and all of her closet. And I stripped her vanity without taking a photo, and this is very powerful for me, and I'm very grateful because now I have a memory of her vanity as it was before I stripped it. So I'm grateful.
This is one of the things, you can't applaud something like this, you just hold your breath. You understand? You had a blessed moment. You had a blessed moment of collective memory that will live with you forever. So don't feel sad that you let those things go. What you will do in the future is hold on to things, you understand, and recreate it. It's okay, it validates it. This is an area of work that I do, which is very intimate women's work. It's a very intimate aesthetic, and this is why I don't do it often, and I don't come out to public, and I don't look for opportunities to display it. This was a very intense process for Jose and I. I have to say that Carol, your work, and Michael, your work, were very influential in that as I was, quote unquote, finishing the installation, there was something missing. Installation work is very organic. It's alive. You can tell from the emotions that it can stir. It's an organic, living thing. It has its own life force. And the floor, when I first met Jose and we were talking about 9/11 and he didn't tell you what really pissed me off about not wanting to talk
Let me
to
tell
him.
you.
Go ahead, you tell me. Go ahead.
Okay. Do I have to get back up to a circle?
No.
Okay. All right. As I mentioned earlier, I got tired of looking at the plane going into the building. So I brought the book over to Leslie. Leslie is telling me about the installation she's going to do. She's going to pull out a drawing to show me the drawing. I said, no, I don't want to see the drawing. Tell me about it. All right. As I was saying earlier, the difference between architects and artists are architects a lot of times have to tell a potential client what they're going to do, what the influences are behind their philosophical underpinning, how they're going to meet the budget. You know, tell them as much as you can to get the job. Well, an artist works differently. So by me quizzing Leslie that way, the next morning, I woke up about 8 o'clock in the morning. By 8:30, I'm calling Leslie. And the reason I'm calling Leslie is that when I taught architecture, I would always have all of my students' telephone numbers. And I told them that a lot of times I would go to sleep thinking about their design problems, and I'd wake up in the morning with a solution. Well, I critiqued Leslie's installation piece before she's installed it during my sleep. There were 2 parts to Leslie's installation that concerned me. One was the floor piece, and then the other part was that I said she needed a sky piece. The floor piece seemed inconsistent with the character and message that she was conveying with the wall component. The sky piece was mine. Leslie's concept was to utilize the prayers that had been published in the newspapers and to cover the walls in this corner with those prayers. And then at the bottom, obviously, she was going to have sort of an altar piece. But she didn't have anything up at the top. And somewhere during the night in my dreams, I said, okay, Leslie, the sky piece perhaps, could be lace. And behind the lace, do you have any twinkle Christmas tree lights? Because if you hide those back up under the lace piece, which is more like a sky piece, it could be twinkling, and that could represent the souls of the people who died during 9/11. She listened to me and said, okay, I'll talk to you later. Well, the thing that I didn't realize at the time, Leslie did this with the phone. Who does he think he is? Talking to me like this first thing in the morning, I'm barely awake. Track of dawn. How's the track of dawn for me? Okay, well, what happened, Leslie? Leslie put the sky piece in. A critic who just passed recently named Arthur Danto saw Leslie's installation. I saw the installation also. Now, remember, I've only been talking to this lady less than 2 weeks. However, looking at her installation, I made the following prediction. You are going to get national press on this piece. What did you say, Leslie? Nah. Arthur Danto saw the piece. He wrote an article about the piece. Later in the year, Ms. Magazine called Leslie and put a photograph of her installation in their magazine.
And the Woman of the Year.
The Woman of the Year.
Woman of the Year issue. My point very quickly is this. The floor piece comes as an impact of Jose's insight about architectural space. My working in this space, looking at Michael's work and the terrain, the organicness of the terrain. And so the bottom of the piece, I wanted to have it connote or convey water. So it's made out of river stones and glass pebbles to kind of like twinkle like water dancing off, light dancing off the surface. And it is also, as I'm going through this intuitive thing with Obatala, I realized that Obatala is married to Ye Manche, the Orisha of the waters.
That is really powerful. Well, and does anyone have any questions? Well, we're going to include the program, and I'd like to thank Michael, Carol, Leslie, and Jose. This was really profound, allowing us to peek inside your creative process, understand how you collaborate, and it's just really been fascinating and very educational, and I thank you all for contributing and participating. It's really been an honor to work with you, and I hope this won't be the last time someone came through to look at the show and said, oh my God, you have got to do this again. And so if you are in for it, we can't wait to see what the next installation is, and Michael and Carol, who you're writing about and what you're photographing would be really fascinating to see in the future. So we thank you. This is really extraordinary. Thank you all for coming. Next weekend, Jose and Leslie will be here for the holiday sale. They will be participating along with other fine craftsmen and women who will have their goods here.
Body and soul.
Body and soul.
Body and soul.
The time is
Noon to 5.
noon to 5, so come back.
Saturday and Sunday.
Yes, and in February, just to go a little bit forward with our exhibition calendar, we are featuring in the In and Outsiders. We will have work by Annie Pagat, Elizabeth Scott, who is Joyce Scott's mother. She was a quilter, textile artist, and also Tom Miller, who all three of these artists are Baltimoreans. They have all passed on. And Tom Miller, you may have seen his murals throughout the city. He has 6 huge murals in Baltimore. He repurposed furniture, fine furniture, and painted beautiful images on furniture. He was also a printmaker. Andy Pagat is the outsider artist in the group. He was a folk artist. So come back, extraordinary sculptural work of Andy's. So we thank you again for your support in attending Galerie Myrtis, Tea with Myrtis Art Salon, and I hope you enjoyed the afternoon. And also, one more note. Some of you were very interested in buying Michael and Carol's work, and it was a size issue, so we have smaller pieces in the back. I think they're at $400. And we have some other works by Michael and Carol as well. So, and of course the installation is available, and Maya's and MK's pieces are available also. So thank you.